I have a question for you. What city is the most populated city in the Western Hemisphere? This city is larger than Los Angeles or New York City or Buenos Aires or Rio de Janeiro. It's Mexico City. Mexico City is the largest city in this hemisphere and is a bustling modern city with a colorful and rich history. In this podcast, we will explain why geographers find Mexico City so interesting. Elementary students may benefit by having a map of Mexico at your fingertips and placing Mexico City on that map, as well as writing facts about Mexico City on the map itself. This podcast addresses the Minnesota Geography Standard for some 4th and some 8th grade standards. Specifically for Grade 4, Geospatial Skills 4.3.1.2.1, Regions 4.3.2.3.1, Locate Places 4.3.4.2, and 4.3.4.9.1. Also, for Grade 8, Places and Regions 8.3.2.3.1, and Human Systems 8.3.3.5.2 and 8.3.3.6.2. You are listening to a podcast created by the Minnesota Alliance for Geographic Education. Our mission is to help you understand your world better through geography. Our presenter is Kari Kunze Hogue, a master Spanish teacher at Mounds Park Academy in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Mexico City is an interesting place, and it's interesting to look at the early history of Mexico City and who lived there and what happened in the building of it. Can you describe to us where Mexico City is on a map?
Well, Mexico City, if you take a picture of a map of Mexico and kind of draw a line through the middle of it, Mexico City is just under that line or just south to the midpoint in Mexico.
All right. What's the history of Mexico City? How did it come to be? What are some of the dates and who lived there first?
Well, Mexico City is in that central Mexican plateau in the Altiplano. It's geographically between a couple of mountain ranges with some volcanoes in it. And what happened is many, many years ago, the indigenous population of Mexico was nomadic. And so they were traveling from northern Mexico, possibly as far north as the Bering Strait, looking for a homeland. As they wandered, they gathered different tribes, and this group grew and grew, and they needed a place to stay. Well, their principal god at the time was somebody named Huitzilopochtli. And Huitzilopochtli went to their leader in a dream and said that they should look for an eagle with a snake in its mouth sitting on top of a cactus on an island. It was a very specific dream for where they should found their city. And so this group of people, which were not quite yet the Aztecs, but this nomadic indigenous group, wandered until they happened to find that. And they saw this eagle with the snake in its mouth sitting on top of a cactus in the middle of an island on Lake Texcoco. Lake Texcoco is where current Mexico City is today. And they founded their city there. And the Aztecs were a growing tribe at the time. They were conquering lots of other peoples, and so their numbers were growing. And as they grew, the island was no longer big enough for them. And so they had to weave mats to extend the island. Eventually, they had woven so many mats from the central island out to the banks that they'd used up all of the water. And this is important when we consider Mexico City today, because the Mexico City of today was founded on that lake bed. In fact, in the center of Mexico City today, there's a place called the Plaza de las Tres Culturas, or the place of three cultures. And in this area, and the Mexican government found this out when they were excavating for the new subway system, they went down and they can find the ruins of that Aztec city, which was called Tenochtitlan. And on top of that were the Spanish colonial buildings that the Spaniards built when Cortés came and conquered the Aztecs. And on top of that, or nearby that, are the modern Mexican buildings from today in Mexico City. So it's the three cultures all in one plaza. Now, what's very interesting about this is Mexico City is an enormous city, a recorded population of more than 8 million, but speculated at more than 20 million. And there are huge buildings all over the place, lots of skyscrapers. Well, when you build lots of skyscrapers, they're big and they're heavy, and they're built in the Central Valley of Mexico. And this Central Valley was built on a lake bed. And in this Central Valley, that has mountain chains on either side with some volcanoes in there, it's prone to earthquakes. And so these earthquakes cause the ground to tremble. And because Mexico City is founded on a lake bed, many of these buildings are not stable, and so a lot of them can be knocked down. They're also sinking because they're on top of a lake bed, and so modern Mexico City is, of course, trying to find ways to rectify this. There was an earthquake in the 80s that knocked down several skyscrapers, and since in the rebuilding of Mexico City now, they're doing much better construction with deeper foundation to try and prevent such damage from earthquakes in the future.
If I go as a tourist to Mexico City and I'm on the streets of Mexico City, what kind of a sensory experience would I have?
Well, that's an interesting question. Like I just mentioned, that there are many tall skyscrapers or rascacielos throughout Mexico City. That's what you'll see. When I think of St. Paul or Minneapolis for a Minnesotan, we can drive along the highway and you can see the outline of the skyscrapers. And so there's a definite Minnesota or Minneapolis skyline. There's a definite St. Paul skyline. When you're in Mexico City, there are so many tall buildings that you really can't get far enough away to see the skyline from any one point. In fact, in the center of Mexico City, there's a hill called Chapultepec Hill, which is Nahuatl, or the language of the Aztecs, for Grasshopper Hill. And on top of that, there's a castle that was built by the Emperor Maximilian when France was in charge of Mexico for a short time. And you can go to the top of that hill, and in every direction, if you turn completely around, all you can see is tall buildings in every single direction. So first of all, you're going to see a skyline like that. Also, with a population of 20 million people trapped between two mountain chains in a valley, you're going to have a lot of pollution. Normally when you have cars that drive around, that the exhaust lifts up and gets carried away. But because it's in this valley, in the Central Valley in Mexico, that pollution doesn't float away, it stays trapped in there. And so you'll notice a strong amount of contamination on certain days, particularly in the humid days of summer when it can be difficult to breathe clean air. Closer to the ground as you're walking around, there's going to be a lot of people. The traffic noise is very loud. It's common to communicate with your horn in Mexico. And so instead of using your signal, you'll tell somebody to get out of the way, or you'll say, come on, let's move. And it's a lot of horn noise. Also, as you're walking around, a lot of people buy their food off the streets, just like we do in big cities in the United States, like New York. And so you'll see stands for things like churros. And you can buy your churro just like we'd have in the United States, although these are often rellenos, or filled with either a chocolate frosting or a vanilla frosting or a strawberry frosting, or sencillos, which means they're just covered in the basic cinnamon and sugar. Or you can find chicharrones. Chicharrón is pork rind, but instead of in the small little rinds like we'd buy in a bag here in the United States as junk food, it comes in a big, large sheet. And so it'll be a glass case, and you'll get a large sheet, maybe 2 feet long, of chicharrón. And on top of that little stand that'll sell it, there'll be some salsa that you can put on top, and you'll eat it as you walk around. Other things you can find are stands that sell coconuts. Now, coconuts are not growing in Mexico City. They brought them in from the coast. But they cut them up into tiny little slices and then cover them in chili powder and put them into a bag. And so you dip your coconut into chili powder and kind of suck off the chili powder and walk around. There are open-air markets all over the place that sell artesanías, or there'll be a market that sells fresh fruits and vegetables, or a market that sells all kinds of cuts of meat, and you'll see the animals hanging there ready to be purchased. And so the sights and sounds are quite different than in a U.S. city.
You have been listening to a production of the Minnesota Alliance for Geographic Education. Background music is courtesy of Jim Hogue of Decorah, Iowa. The Minnesota Alliance is a non-profit group of educators and other parties who are interested in promoting an enhanced understanding of our world through improved geographic literacy.